Alright, so I'm going to be showing you guys how subscribers and publishers work in ROS. We're going to be following along with the ROS Wiki tutorial, and we're going to be programming in Python. So to find the tutorial we're going to be using, if you want to copy and paste any of the code snippets, you're going to search, or you can search ROS subpub Python on Google. It should be the first result. So publishers and subscribers in ROS are going to be how we store data and then transfer it from one ROS node to another. So with a publisher, when we have data that we want to publish, we're going to use a publisher and then publish that data to a message, and then say in a different node running at the same time or running later, we want to subscribe to that message if we want to access the data, and then we can use it within that code too. So I'm going to assume you guys have done the earlier tutorials. If you haven't yet, you can just click right here and follow along with those steps. And then when you're done, you should be able to come back here and be all set up. So first, we're going to get into our beginner tutorials workspace. So you're going to want to open a terminal. CD into your Catkin workspace, then go to source, and then beginner tutorials. It should be empty right now, so we're gonna, except for something that came with it. So we're gonna make a new folder. So mkdir, call it scripts. That's how we're always gonna store our Python files in a scripts folder. And then we're gonna CD into scripts. Just a little bit bigger. Alright, sweet. Alright, to get the Python file we need, you could either copy and paste, make a Python file and then copy and paste it into here, or from there, or you can just run this command right here. Oops. So make sure you're inside your scripts folder, paste that in and run it. And then it should have added a file to your scripts folder here. So if we wanted to cd or ls, so list is you can just list everything inside of it. And then you see talker.py got added. It used to be empty. And then before we start anything, we're just gonna run chmod, and that's just gonna make it so the Python file is executable. All right, sweet. So cool shortcut you can do if you have VS Code, run code space dot, open up everything inside of your current folder into VS Code. Alright, so here's our talker.py. Alright, so I'm just going to take you guys through what's really going on here, give you a good idea. When you pulled it from GitHub and downloaded it, it might have pasted like a bunch of junk before the code actually started. You can just delete all that, except to make sure you keep this line at the top. This line is telling ROS that your code, this node is going to be in Python, so it just knows how to interpret it, and then what to execute it into. So these first two lines are just our import statements. This one is going to be in every single ROS node that you've written in Python. ROS.py is just the package that has everything in it. That's like the default stuff that makes sure it actually runs. And then this one right here is just importing a special string type for ROS that we're going to use later. So the first thing we want to go over is the main. This is the entry point into the node. You see this kind of weird try catch thing, basically try except. Basically, don't really worry about it right now. We can just kind of ignore it. Just pretend it says talker right here, and it's just that's basically running. So then it goes into this function right here. I'll explain why it's like that in a minute. So let's say we get to the try, and no exception is thrown. So we go right into this talker function. So first, the most important part of it right here is this. ROSPy.publisher. So publisher, we're usually going to have just 3 arguments. This first argument is the message name it's going to be published under. So the message is always going to have an ID, a string ID associated with it. So the publisher is creating a message, so you can name the string ID anything you want. That makes sense. So for this one, we're just calling it chatter. Inside of the chatter message, we're going to store a string. That's why we imported a string up here. It's just the data type we want to store inside the message. And queue size is 10. That just has to do with how much leftover data is stored. So 10 is usually, I think, just default. But you can make that bigger or smaller depending on how you wanted to run it. So this line here, ROSPy.init node, this is creating a node in ROS called Talker. So that kind of makes sense. Our Python file is called Talker, so it's going to create a node called Talker. You could also put that down here if you wanted to, inside of your main. Right here, we're storing we're creating a ROS object called rate 10 Hertz. That'll come in handy later. So here's pretty simple. It's just kind of like a while loop you would normally see, where it's just going to run something until a condition is met, and then it'll leave it. So the condition in this case is going to be ROSPy.is shut down. All that means is stay inside this while loop until I get a basically notification that ROS is no longer running. So the node that this is inside, the node that this would be running inside of, or the current instance of ROS that this node would be running inside of, is turned off. All that's happening here, it's creating a string, hello world, and concatenating the current time. Just logging it to the console. Doesn't really matter, we could delete that. And then finally, this is the other crucial part, pub.publish. It's publishing onto the publisher object we created the hello string variable. So remember, it's the string type, so all it is publishing hello world with the current time to that topic. So then later on we could make a subscriber in a different node, and then we'd be able to access chatter. So this rate.sleep, all it is using this rate we set up here to basically just how it is it's basically freezes time, but only within this node. So you could put a delay, except you don't really want to do that because this way it's just like a basically multi-threading. Doesn't really matter. So all it is just a sleep, so we don't just keep running this while loop ridiculously quickly. It just like runs it, waits, gets back up here, runs it, waits. And then this part's what's kind of interesting, so we can go back and explain this try except here. Basically, there can be an issue where when you turn off when you turn ROS off, you can get an error when you use sleep that's like, so you quit it mid run, and then sleep gets confused, so it'll throw an error and be like, oh, there's no longer an instance of ROS running or whatever. So this is basically just to make sure the error doesn't get pushed out to the console then whenever the node would be closed. So yeah, this one's pretty simple. There's a lot of maybe new stuff. Maybe it's pretty clear to you, but that's okay. So let's just do a quick review of what's really going on here. So we're going to import everything we need, especially ROSPy, and then we're also going to use this string import to get the data type we want to have as the publisher, or have within the publisher. Next, we're going to have our entry point main, and it's going to, every time it starts, it's going to go into Talker. So it calls Talker, creates a publisher, name it chatter, and chatter is capable of storing a string. Initialize the node. It doesn't have to be in this function, but that's okay. Create a rate object. We're going to use that later to make sure the while loop isn't running too often when it wouldn't need to. Just slow down the while loop a little bit. And then the while loop. So as long as ROSPy is running, as long as it's not shut down, keep running this while loop over and over again. Never leave this function. Store our string as hello world concatenated with the current time. Log that to the console. Publish that string under chatter. And then finally we're just going to do rate.sleep. So it's going to sleep however long the current rate object is that it's being called on. And then it's going to call this while again. And this is going to keep running this while loop within our node until the user finally quits ROS, in which case we're going to get an exception, except we have our code set up so it catches the exception and then it ignores it with the pass. Alright, so that's about all there is to it. I'm going to take, oops, that's weird. I'm going to take you guys through subscribers next.